With his jug-handle ears, bulbous nose, and weak chin, Harvey Murray Glatman was not a glamorous figure, nor were the final photographs that he took of his models. Even as a youngster, he had equated sex with bondage. He enjoyed autoerotic games, suspending himself from a beam in the attic of his home to reach orgasm. His parents were reassured by the family physician that he would grow out of his fantasies if they could find some means to keep him busy. But the young boy was sufficiently busy by himself. Harvey had been born in the Bronx, New York City, in 1927, but the family moved to Denver, Colorado, around 1938. At school, he was rated highly intelligent. His IQ was later assessed at 130, but with his odd looks, he was unable to attract girlfriends. It seems that as an adolescent, he would creep into women's apartments after school, force them partially to undress, and then fondle them. At age 17, his idea of fun was to grab the purse from a good-looking girl and run off laughing before throwing it back to her. But one day in 1945, he accosted a girl with a toy pistol in his hand and ordered her to strip. She yelled, he fled, and was arrested later the same day. After spending time in the state prison in Boulder, he was released on bail and took off back to his native city. In New York, Glatman committed a series of street robberies of women at gunpoint, this time with a real pistol, and earned the name of the Phantom Bandit before being caught breaking and entering an apartment. Identified as a wanted man in Boulder, he was sentenced to 5 years in Sing Sing. In 1951, Glatman was released from prison on parole and traveled all the way across the country to Los Angeles, where he set up a TV repair shop. He took up photography as a spare time interest and, for 5 or 6 years, led an outwardly innocent bachelor life, while his lust was fueled by studying glossy Glamour magazines and gloating over naked models in the studio of the photographic club that he joined. On July 30th, 1957, Glatman answered a TV service call to the apartment of Judy Ann Dull, a 19-year-old model who had recently arrived in Los Angeles from Florida. Calling himself Johnny Glynn, he told her that he was a photographer and had been commissioned to shoot a series of photos for a New York True Detective magazine. You know, the typical bound and gagged stuff. 2 days later, Glatman called on Judy and drove her to his apartment. There she submitted to having her hands tied behind her, her legs roped together, and a gag put in her mouth. He pulled down her sweater, raised her skirt, and took several photographs, after which he stripped her and, holding a gun to her head, raped her twice. It was his first experience of real, if not consensual, sex. Both naked, Glatman and Judy sat on the sofa watching television. Then, when she promised him that she would not report the rape if he let her go, he drove her 125 miles east of Los Angeles into the desert near Indios. Once he had reached an isolated spot, he photographed her again, this time in her underwear. He then strangled her with a piece of rope and buried her body in a shallow grave. The grave was, in fact, so shallow that the desert winds blew away the sand to reveal her skeletal remains on December 29, 1957. For more than 6 months, Glatman was apparently satisfied with the enlarged photographs that he hung on his apartment walls. Then, in search of another victim, he joined a Lonely Hearts Club, giving his name as George Williams. He met 24-year-old divorcee Shirley Ann Bridgeford, and on March 9, 1958, Telling her that he was taking her dancing, he drove again far out into the desert, this time 55 miles away to Anza State Park, east of San Diego. There he raped her repeatedly, tied her up, took photographs, and then strangled her with his piece of rope. He left her corpse behind a cactus clump and took away her red panties as a trophy. Glatman's third victim was a part-time stripper, Ruth Rita Mercado, 24, who advertised in the personal columns of the Los Angeles Times that she was looking for modeling work. On the 23rd of July, 1958, having made an appointment to interview her, Glatman went to her apartment carrying his gun and raped her. Then he drove her out to the desert where he spent all day, alternately photographing and raping her. He nearly let her go. She was the only one I really liked, he said in his later confession. I didn't want to kill her. I used the same rope, the same way. As with all serial killers, Glatman's need to satisfy his perverted lust was now accelerating. Realizing that the newspaper classified columns were a promising source of potential victims, he began to advertise, promising auditions for modeling opportunities for young women with no previous experience necessary. A number answered the advertisements but found him creepy and refused to accept the assignments he offered them. After several failed attempts, Glatman found 28-year-old Lorraine Vigil, who was desperately short of money, and agreed to his offer of work. On the 27th of October, 1958, he called for her in his car and set off at speed along the Santa Ana freeway on his way to the desert. But on the outskirts of Los Angeles, near the town of Tustin, she became alarmed and begged him to stop. Glatman pulled onto the hard shoulder, brought out his gun, and demanded that she strip. Desperately, she grabbed at the gun. It went off and she was hit in the thigh, but bravely she held on and succeeded in leveling the gun at her abductor. He hurled himself at her and together they fell from the car, furiously wrestling for possession. At that moment, a highway patrol drew up on the other side of the freeway, and the driver, pulling out his gun and firing a warning shot, ran across the road. Glatman surrendered quietly, although he later claimed vainly that he could have shot the officer if he wished. In Glatman's apartment, the police found the many photographs that he had taken of his 3 victims, stripped, bound, and gagged, and he readily confessed to their murder. His trial in November 1958 lasted only 3 days, and he refused to accept the advice of his appointed lawyers that he should appeal. He asked for the death sentence and went to the gas chamber in San Quentin on August 18, 1959.